The forest knows no titles, only the weight of a heartbeat and the scent of survival. For 10 years, I was not a girl, but a shadow among the pines, protected by a silent black wolf I called Basalt. Then came the civilized ones, men who smelled of cold iron and arrogance. They didn't see a survivor, they saw a feral defect. They dragged me from the moss, threw me into a cage of concrete and bleach, and told me my protector was dead. They didn't realize they hadn't just captured a girl. They had brought the forest's reckoning into their very home. The Greenwood Expanse does not breathe. It pulses. It is a cathedral of ancient spruce and damp earth, where silence is a survival skill. For Rowan, the world began and ended at the edge of the tree line. She was 18, perhaps 19. The suns and snows were the only ink on her calendar. She moved through the undergrowth with a liquid grace that defied her human skin, a skin she often found clumsy and loud. 10 years ago, a fire had turned her world to ash. She remembered the heat, the screaming of wood. And then, nothing. Only the cold and the amber eyes of the timber wolves who had found a shivering, scentless child and decided, for reasons known only to the wild, that she was one of them. But her truest companion was Basalt. He was a giant, a black mass of muscle and fur that stood shoulder height to her. While the other 6 wolves in the pack were lean and restless, Basalt was a mountain of stillness. He was her guardian, her heat in the winter, and her silent teacher. He never barked. He never played. He carried an air of ancient, heavy sorrow, as if he were mourning a world he could no longer reach. Rowan reached into the small pouch at her waist, her fingers brushing her most prized possession. A charred wooden wolf pendant, its edges smoothed by years of her thumb tracing its shape. It was the only thing that had survived the fire. Whenever the human memories tried to surface, flashes of a soft bed or the smell of baked bread, she would squeeze the pendant until the wood bit into her palm, grounding her in the reality of the forest. Basalt, she whispered, the word rusty from disuse. The black wolf appeared at her side as if he had been woven from the shadows. He nudged her hand with a cold, wet nose. Rowan leaned her forehead against his, inhaling the scent of pine needles and wild rain. "Something is wrong," she murmured. The wind had shifted. It no longer carried the scent of rabbit or damp moss. It tasted of metallic exhaust and sharp, anxious sweat. Basalt's head snapped up. A low growl rumbled deep in his chest, a sound that didn't just hit the ears, but vibrated through Rowan's bones. She trusted that growl more than she trusted the rising sun. "Men," she hissed. They came from the east, crashing through the brush with the careless arrogance of those who believe they own the land because they have a map of it. There were 4 of them, dressed in identical dark green uniforms with a crest on the shoulder, a stylized stone mountain, the Stone Crest Dominion. "Spread out!" a voice barked. "Beta Corbin wants this sector cleared before the Alpha Kings return. We can't have rogues or ferals wandering near the border." Rowan and Basalt sank into the ferns, becoming part of the earth. But the wind was a traitor. One of the men stopped, his nostrils flaring. He was a shifter, his senses heightened by the wolf within. "Wait, do you smell that? It's strange. Not a rogue, it's female, an omega." The word omega felt like a physical sting to Rowan. In the pack, she was family. To these men, she was a category, a resource. "Look," another pointed. They had found her den, a hollowed-out log tucked beneath a great spruce. One of the men reached inside and pulled out a small collection of her treasures. A bird skull, a handful of translucent river stones, and an old, cracked leather boot she had found years ago. "Gods," the man breathed, tossing the boot aside. "It's a feral, a shifter girl living like a beast." Rowan's blood turned to ice. She didn't care about the stones or the boot. but they were touching her home. Basalt stepped in front of her, his teeth bared, his fur standing in a jagged ridge along his spine. He looked terrifying, a demon of the woods. "Easy, big fella," the lead man, a scout named Jet, said, as he raised a sleek black rifle. It wasn't a hunting rifle, it was a tranquilizer gun. "We're not here to kill you. We're just taking the girl home. She's a Stonecrest citizen, whether she likes it or not." Rowan didn't wait. She moved like a weasel, all speed and sharp edges. She dropped from a low-hanging branch, her only human tool, a scavenged hunting knife in her hand. She didn't want to kill, she wanted to flee. She sliced the strap of Jet's rifle, but there were too many of them. Basalt was a whirlwind of black fury. He took down the second man, his jaws closing on a shoulder, throwing him against a tree. But the men were prepared for a wolf. Hiss! A dart sprouted from Basalt's neck. He yelped, a sound of shock, not pain. "No!" Rowan screamed. She lunged toward him, but a second dart caught him in the flank. The giant wolf stumbled. His golden eyes, usually so sharp and protective, clouded with confusion. His powerful legs buckled, and the mountain of a wolf collapsed into the dirt. "Basalt! Wake up! Basalt!" Rowan threw her body over his, her knife pointed at the men, her eyes wild and wet. She was an Omega, supposedly the weakest of her kind. But at that moment, she looked like she could tear the world apart. Jet sighed, rubbing his bruised shoulder. "Look at her. She's completely feral. Unmated, unbranded. This is going to be a mess for the healers." "Should we tranquilize her too?" "No," Jet said, stepping forward. "The Alpha King is coming back tomorrow. Corbin wants her presentable. Just knock her out." The last thing Rowan felt was the cold, hard butt of a rifle against her temple. The world exploded into white heat, and then faded into the smell of pine and the fading warmth of Basalt's fur beneath her cheek. Waking up was a symphony of wrongness. In the greenwood, the morning always began with the scent of damp moss and the distant rhythmic drumming of a woodpecker. But here, the air was dead. It was stale, dry, and poisoned with chemical smells that burned Rowan's nostrils. Bleach, floor wax, and a cloying, artificial lavender that made her stomach churn. She opened her eyes and didn't see the canopy of spruce. She saw a ceiling of gray concrete. The ground beneath her wasn't soft earth. It was cold, unnervingly flat stone. Rowan lunged to her feet, her muscles coiled for a flight that didn't exist. She hit metal. The clang of the steel bars echoed through the small room, vibrating in her skull. She was in a cage, 3 walls of concrete and 1 of bars. She was naked beneath a rough, canvas-like shift that scraped against her skin like sand. Her hands flew to her waist. Her knife was gone. Her clothes were gone. And her thumb searched frantically for the charred wooden pendant, but there was only bare skin. They had taken her memories. They had hosed her down with ice-cold water and scrubbed her with stiff bristles until her skin was raw. "Basalt?" she croaked. Her throat felt like it was filled with dry glass. "Where is my wolf?" "Oh, it speaks." A woman stood outside the bars. She was tall, with hair the color of polished copper, pulled back so tightly it seemed to paint a permanent sneer on her face. She wore a crisp white coat that smelled of antiseptic and a bitterness that Rowan recognized as deep-seated resentment. "I am Gwenna Monroe," the woman said, her voice like the snapping of dry twigs. "Chief healer of the Stonecrest Dominion, and you, little creature, are a significant problem." Rowan didn't care about the name. She lunged at the bars again, her fingers hooking around the cold metal. "Where's the Black Wolf? Where's Basalt?" Gwenna didn't flinch. She adjusted a small tablet in her hand, her stylus clicking impatiently. "You mean the large rogue found with you? He was unmarked, aggressive, and a danger to our border patrols. He has been Processed. Processed, Rowan repeated. The word was alien. What is processed? Gwenna sighed, the sound of a teacher forced to explain a simple concept to a dull child. He's gone, girl. Put down. It was for the safety of the pack. You're lucky Beta Corbin saw some value in you, though I fail to see it myself. The world tilted. The gone didn't register at first, but put down hit like a physical blow. Dead. The sound that tore itself from Rowan's throat was not human. It was a raw, primal scream of loss, a wolf's howl for a shattered bond. She threw herself against the concrete, her nails scraping the walls until they bled. Basalt. Her protector. The only family she had known for a decade was gone because of these people. She collapsed into a heap of raw grief, slamming her fists against the unyielding floor. The void in her chest was cold and vast, a space where his warmth should have been. Gwenna watched her with detached, scientific interest. Extreme emotional distress, primal vocalizations. Subject reverts to animalistic responses under pressure. She made a quick note on her tablet. She is exactly as we thought. Nothing more than a beast in a girl's skin. I will kill you, Rowan whispered, the words a jagged promise. Gwenna actually laughed, a short, barking sound. You'll do nothing. You're a feral omega, a defect. In the wild, you were a resource. Here, you're a burden. Beta Corbin seems to think you can be reintegrated into a household. He's a fool. The heavy door at the end of the hall buzzed open, and a man entered with a heavy, arrogant stride. He was built like a bull, with a military-style haircut and eyes that were too small for his large, fleshy face. His scent was offensive, like soured milk and rusted iron. Well, he boomed, stopping in front of the cage. Is the acquisition clean? Physically, Gwenna said, her distaste clear. Mentally, she's a lost cause. She's broken. Corbin grinned, a predator's smile that made Rowan's skin crawl. Broken is good. Broken can be trained. The Alpha King is due back tonight. We'll present her to him tomorrow as a tribute from the wild. A rare vintage for his collection. He rapped his knuckles against the bars, as if she were a zoo animal. Get her dressed in something other than a sack, Gwenna. I want the king to see exactly what we found. She represents the chaos we've cleared from his borders. As they walked away, their voices echoed down the hall, and Rowan, huddled in the corner, strained her ears. Her senses, honed by 10 years of survival, caught a snippet of conversation they didn't intend for her to hear. And the Black Wolf? Gwenna asked, her voice dropping. Still unconscious in the containment wing, Corbin grunted. The tranquilizers we use for the king are potent. He'll be out for hours. Once the king sees this feral girl, we'll decide what to do with the beast. Maybe we'll let her watch us put it down. Rowan's head snapped up, unconscious, not dead, not processed. Gwenna had lied. She had used the lie as a weapon to break Rowan's spirit. A new feeling, cold and sharp as her lost hunting knife, cut through the grief. It was rage, pure, focused, and patient. They had Basalt. They had lied. And they were going to kill him. Basalt, she whispered to the empty, sterile room. I'm coming. She was no longer a grieving girl. She was a hunter, and this concrete cage was just another forest she would learn to stalk. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to map the sounds of the building, the click of the guards' boots, the hum of the ventilation, and the distant, heavy thud of a door to the west, the containment wing. The next morning, the silence of the stone corridor was shattered by the rhythmic thud of combat boots. Rowan didn't move from her corner. She had spent the night counting the seconds between the guards' rotations, mapping the vibrations of the building through the floor. She knew exactly when the shift changed, and she knew the scent of the man currently unlocking her door. He smelled of cheap tobacco and fear. He was one of the guards who had seen Basalt in the woods, and he didn't trust the feral girl who watched him with eyes like a hawk. "Up," he grunted, sliding a tray of gray, unidentifiable mush onto the floor. "Healer Gwenna's orders. You're to be prepared for the king." Rowan didn't touch the food. Instead, she watched him, her body a coiled spring. She needed to get out of this cell. The containment wing was to the west, down one level. She had smelled the faint, metallic scent of the tranquilizers drifting through the ventilation ducts. 2 hours later, Gwenna returned. She wasn't alone. 2 other healers followed her, carrying a bundle of blue silk that looked like a piece of the sky fallen into a gutter. "Wash her again," Gwenna commanded, her voice thin and sharp, "and put her in this. Beta Corbin wants her to look like a reclaimed citizen, not a swamp rat." The preparation was a second humiliation. They scrubbed her until her skin burned, and they forced her into the blue dress. It was restrictive, the silk catching on the rough patches of her skin, the hem tripping her feet. It felt like a net. But as Gwenna turned her back to consult her tablet, Rowan saw it. On a nearby metal trolley, amidst glass vials and steel tools, lay a small, dark object. The charred wooden pendant. It had been discarded like trash, a piece of feral debris. Seeing it there, the only thing that connected her to the girl she was before the fire, ignited something reckless in Rowan's chest. She waited. She timed her breath to the clicking of Gwenna's stylus. When the copper-haired woman stepped toward the door to usher the guards in, Rowan moved. She didn't run. She flowed. In one silent motion, she snatched the pendant from the tray and tucked it into the bodice of the dress, the charcoal-stained wood pressing against her heart. But the victory made her bold. Instead of staying in the corner as ordered, she used the moment the door swung open to bolt. She was a blur of blue silk. She ducked under a guard's arm, her bare feet silent on the stone. She didn't head for the exit. She headed for the stairs. West. Down. The mistake. In the Greenwood, when a predator is near, you run until you find the high ground or the deep water. But the Citadel was not a forest. It was a labyrinth of sensors and invisible eyes. Rowan reached the lower level, her lungs burning. The scent of the tranquilizers was stronger here, heavy and sweet. She found a heavy steel door labeled Containment Sector 4. Through the small reinforced window, she saw him. Basalt. He was lying on a raised platform, his black fur matted, his chest rising and falling in shallow, labored breaths. He was shackled. Thick silver chains bound his paws to the table. The sight of her giant, noble protector reduced to a laboratory specimen broke the last of her restraint. "Basalt!" she cried out, slamming her palms against the glass. It was an emotional yelp, a call of the pack. In the wild, it would have summoned her family. Here, it triggered the alarm. A high-pitched siren began to wail, a sound like 1,000 screaming birds. Basalt's ears twitched. His golden eyes fluttered open, clouded with drugs, and he let out a weak, agonizing whine of recognition. He tried to lunge toward her voice, the silver chains searing his skin, the scent of burning fur instantly filling the air. "No, stop! Don't move!" Rowan screamed, her heart shattering as she watched him suffer because of her. Before she could find a way to open the door, a hand seized her hair. She was yanked backward, her head snapping back, as Beta Corbin's face loomed over her, twisted in a mask of triumph and fury. "I wondered how long it would take for the animal to find its master," he hissed, his grip tightening. He didn't just drag her away. He forced her to watch through the glass as a guard approached the struggling Basalt with a long electric prod. "No!" Rowan fought, her nails clawing at Corbin's thick wrists. "Leave him! It was me! I ran! Leave him alone!" "You just made a very expensive mistake, Feral," Corbin whispered into her ear, his breath hot and smelling of rot. "I was going to present you as a success story. Now, I think I'll use him to ensure your cooperation. Every time you snap at a guest or refuse to bow to the king, he gets a jolt. Do you understand?" Rowan stopped fighting. She went limp in his arms, her eyes fixed on Basalt, who had slumped back onto the table, his spirit flickering like a dying candle. She had tried to save him with the logic of the forest, and all she had done was give their captors a leash. The wooden pendant pressed into her skin, a cold reminder of her failure. "Take her to the audience hall," Corbin barked at the guards. "The king's motorcade is at the gate, and tell the containment team to keep the wolf awake. I want her to hear him if she misbehaves." As they dragged her up the stairs, Rowan felt a silence settle over her. Not the peaceful silence of the greenwood, but the heavy, suffocating silence of a trap that had finally closed. The audience hall was a cavern of polished marble, so cold and reflective, it felt like walking on a frozen lake. High arched windows allowed the afternoon sun to cut through the space in sharp, dusty shafts, illuminating the dozens of shifters who had gathered to witness the king's return. They were dressed in silks and fine wools, their scents a confusing, suffocating storm of old money, judgment, and a rigid pack hierarchy Rowan couldn't begin to understand. Rowan was a bruise on this pristine canvas. Her hair was a wild tangle, her feet were bare against the marble, and her blue silk dress was wrinkled from her struggle. She felt their eyes like physical weights, sharp, mocking, and curious. "Presenting the acquisition," Beta Corbin announced, his voice booming with a false, oily pride. "A feral omega, found living like a beast in the deep greenwood, a testament to our efforts to bring order to the borders." A ripple of whispers followed. Feral. Omega. Look at the state of it. Rowan ignored them. Her mind was a map of survival. She was looking for exits, for guards, for any weakness she could exploit. But mostly, she was listening. In the back of her mind, she could still hear the distant, phantom hum of the sirens from the containment wing. She clutched the charred wooden pendant through the silk of her dress, the charcoal smudging the blue fabric. It was the only thing that felt real. "Kneel!" Gwenna hissed, her hand pressing hard on Rowan's shoulder. Rowan didn't move. She didn't bow. A wolf doesn't kneel to a storm. It simply waits for it to pass. Then, the heavy doors at the far end of the hall swung open. The room went silent. It was a silence so absolute it felt like the air had been sucked out of the chamber. A man walked in. He wasn't wearing a crown or robes. He wore a simple dark suit that fit his broad shoulders with military precision. He was tall, his hair dark and cut short, his face looking as though it had been carved from the very granite of the mountains. He moved with an energy that made the air crackle, the unquestionable, heavy authority of a true alpha. This was Alpha King Rhett Conincade. He looked exhausted. His piercing gray eyes swept the room with a weariness that spoke of a decade of burdens. "Corbin," the king said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that resonated in the floorboards. "You said this was urgent." "It is, Alpha King," Corbin said, bowing so low his forehead nearly touched the stone. "We found a rarity, a shifter who has spent 10 years in the wild. We thought she might interest you, a tribute to your reign." The king's gaze landed on Rowan. She met it. She would not look away. But as he stepped closer, the world began to fracture. In the forest, Rowan lived by her nose. Sight could be deceived by shadows, and sound by the wind, but scent was the truth. As the king approached, a scent rolled off him that silenced the noise of the court. It was complex. It was rain on hot stone. It was old leather. But beneath the civilized layers, there was a third hidden scent. It was faint, buried deep, but to Rowan it was a thunderclap. It was the smell of her den. It was pine needles, cave dirt, and the wild, musky warmth of the giant black wolf who had licked her wounds, and slept by her side for 10,000 nights. It was the scent of basalt. Rowan's breath hitched. Her heart, which had been a drum of war, suddenly stopped. She took a trembling step forward, ignoring the gasps of the court. The guards moved to intercept her, but Rhett raised a hand, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly as they locked onto hers. "What did you say?" he asked. His voice was no longer a king's command. It was a strange, fragile whisper. Rowan didn't answer with words. She walked right up to him. This man who could kill her with a flick of his wrist. She lifted a trembling hand and placed her palm flat against his chest, right over his heart. Under the fine fabric of his suit, she felt it. The rhythm. The heat. She closed her eyes and inhaled. There it was. The two scents, man and wolf, were not two things. They were the same. "Basalt?" she whispered. The word was a stone dropped into a silent pool. The entire room seemed to recoil. Alpha King Rhett flinched as if she had struck him. His mask of regal control shattered. He stared at her, and in his gray eyes, Rowan saw a flash of the golden-flecked gaze she had known in the forest. He didn't see a feral Omega. He saw the girl who had shared her scraps of rabbit with him. He saw the girl who had pulled porcupine quills from his muzzle. He saw the only person who had loved him when he was a monster. "Rowan," he breathed. His hand came up, covering hers, his skin burning against her own. The shock was a physical blow. Rowan's knees, which had refused to bend for a king, now buckled. He caught her. In front of his entire court, the Alpha King lunged forward and gathered the feral girl into his arms, holding her with a desperation that made the elders gasp. "How?" he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with 10 years of unspeakable grief. "How are you here?" Gwenna Monroe's face was a study in pure, unadulterated shock. Beta Corbin looked as if he had seen a ghost. They stood frozen as the king of the Stone Crest Dominion ignored his people, his duties, and his dignity, weeping silently into the shoulder of a girl they had called a beast. Rowan pulled back just enough to look at him, her fingers finding the charred wooden pendant she had hidden. She pulled it out, the dark wood a stark contrast to his white shirt. "You left," she accused, the pain of the last few days finally breaking through. "You were gone." Rhett looked at the pendant, the toy he had carved for a little girl, Moinum Truoc, before the poison had taken his mind. His face crumpled. "Everyone out," he ordered, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that was pure, territorial wolf. "But Alpha," Corbin started. "Get out!" The court scrambled to obey. The door slammed shut, leaving them alone in the vast, echoing hall. Rhett didn't let go of her. He guided her to the steps of his throne, and they sat there together, a king in a tailored suit and a girl in a ruined dress, surrounded by the silence of 10 years of lies. "I never meant to leave you," he whispered, his hands trembling as he touched her face. "I never thought I'd be human again." The shadows in the audience hall lengthened, stretching like the fingers of a giant across the marble floor. Rhett sat on the lowest step of the dais, his legs sprawled out, his expensive suit jacket discarded on the floor. He looked less like a king and more like a man who had finally put down a weight he had been carrying for a lifetime. "The poison was a hybrid," Rhett said, his voice distant, as if he were reading from a dusty, forgotten book. "Wolfsbane and silver nitrate. It wasn't meant to kill me, Rowan. My uncle, the regent, wanted the throne. But he needed me alive as a figurehead he could control. The poison didn't stop my heart. It shattered the bridge between my man and my wolf." Rowan sat beside him, her knees pulled to her chest. She traced the grain of the charred pendant. "You were just basalt." "I was trapped," Rhett whispered, looking at his hands. "My mind was a fragmented mirror. I had human thoughts. but they were buried under the roar of the beast. I couldn't speak. I couldn't shift back. I ran because the pain was so great, I thought I could outrun it. I ran into the greenwood to die. He turned to her, his gray eyes shining with a sudden, raw intensity. And then I saw a small, fierce girl with a wooden wolf in her hand. You weren't afraid of me. You brought me water in your palms. You brought me yarrow for the fever. You gave my wolf a purpose, Rowan. You were the only thing that kept the man inside from fading into nothing. But you left, Rowan said, the hurt finally surfacing. One morning, the sun came up, and the hollow was empty. I waited for 3 moons. Rhett reached out, his thumb brushing a stray hair from her forehead. The poison finally faded. 6 months ago, the shift broke. I woke up in the forest as a man, naked and shivering. My mind was clear for the first time in a decade. I knew my uncle had spent years bleeding this dominion dry. I knew if I didn't come back and take my throne, my people would starve. He looked away, his jaw tightening. I thought I was protecting you. I thought the citadel was a viper's nest. And I was right. I wanted to come back for you once I had cleared the rot. But Corbin found you first. He put you in a cage, Rhett, Rowan said, her voice trembling. They told me you were dead. They called it processed. And Gwenna, she has you in a room downstairs. She has you in silver chains. Rhett froze. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. What did you say? The Black Wolf, in the containment wing. Corbin said it was a rogue. They've been drugging him, Rhett. They've been using the same poison that trapped you 10 years ago. The realization hit Rhett like a physical blow. The illness he had been treated for since his return. The vitamins Gwenna had been injecting him with to help with his lingering fatigue. They weren't medicine. They were a leash. Corbin and Gwenna hadn't just captured Rowan. They had been keeping the king in a state of subtle chemical submission, and they were using his own wolf as a test subject in the basement. Before Rhett could roar for his guards, the heavy doors of the hall creaked open. It wasn't a guard. It was Matron Page, the iron-haired elder Rowan had noticed earlier. Her face was grim, her eyes darting to the shadows. "Alpha King," she said, her voice a low, urgent rasp. "You must move. Corbin has called an emergency meeting of the council. He is claiming the feral girl has cast a spell on you, that your mind has finally snapped from the trauma of the wild." "He dares?" Rhett stood, his presence expanding until he filled the room. "He does more than dare," Page said, stepping into the light. "He knows the full moon is in 3 days. He is invoking the law of the unmated. He intends to claim that since you are unfit, the girl must be claimed by a beta to stabilize her scent, or she will be cooled as a threat to the pack's sanity." Rowan felt the pendant bite into her palm. The full moon. In the forest, it was a time of singing and strength. Here, it was a weapon. "He wants to take her," Rhett hissed, the golden flecks in his eyes beginning to glow. "He wants to use my mate to take my crown." "Then we don't give him the chance," Page said, her gaze shifting to Rowan. "But you must understand, Alpha. The pack is scared. They see a girl who growls and a king who weeps. They don't see the truth. They see the chaos of the wild." "I will show them the truth," Rhett promised. He turned to Rowan, his expression softening into something so tender it made her heart ache. "Rowan, I need you to trust me. I'm going to put you in the royal wing. My personal guard, men who were loyal to my father, will stand at the door. I have to go to the council. I have to fight them with their own laws." "Don't let them hurt him," Rowan whispered, thinking of the wolf in the silver chains. "I'm going to get him too," Rhett said, his voice a lethal promise. "By the time the moon rises, there won't be a single chain left in this mountain." But as Rhett walked away with Matron Page, Rowan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the stone floor. She watched them go, her senses picking up a scent that lingered near the doorway. It was the bitter, metallic tang of Gwenna's perfume, mixed with the sharp, acidic smell of a plan already in motion. Corbin wasn't just waiting for the council, he was already moving. In the shadows of the hallway, a guard, one of Corbin's men, quietly adjusted his radio. "The king is occupied. Move the girl to the high tower. Tell the healer we're ready for the demonstration." Rowan clutched her wooden wolf. She was no longer in a cage, but the forest felt further away than ever. The night of the full moon feast arrived, and the citadel felt like a drumskin stretched to the point of snapping. In the forest, the moon was a mother, calling the pack to the high ridges to sing. But inside these stone walls, the moon was a judge. Rowan had been moved to the high tower, a room of glass and velvet that felt more like a birdcage than a sanctuary. They had dressed her again, this time in a gown of deep crimson that felt like a weight of blood on her shoulders. Gwenna had come herself to prepare Rowan, her movements sharp and jerky, her scent a spike of frantic, desperate adrenaline. "You think you've won," Gwenna had whispered, cinching the laces of Rowan's corset so tight it stole her breath. "You think because he remembers your face in the dirt, you are a queen. But the pack doesn't want a feral, they want a legacy. And tonight, we will show them yours." Now, Rowan stood behind the heavy oak doors of the great hall. She could hear the roar of the crowd inside, hundreds of shifters, fueled by wine and the lunar pool. The smell of roasting meat and expensive perfume drifted under the door, a suffocating cloud of civilization. "Presenting the Omega," a voice boomed. The doors swung open. Rowan walked in, her head held high. She was terrified. The sheer volume of the noise and the intensity of the staring eyes was enough to make any creature of the wild bolt. But she thought of Basalt, still chained in the dark, and she thought of Rhett's gray eyes. She clutched the wooden pendant hidden in her palm, its rough edges grounding her. The hall was a sea of hostile faces. At the head table sat the Council of Elders, their expressions etched in doubt. But it was the man in the center who made Rowan's blood run cold. Beta Corbin was sitting in the Alpha's chair. "Where is the king?" one of the elders, a man with a scarred throat, demanded. "The king is indisposed," Corbin announced, standing and spreading his arms. The trauma of his return, coupled with the influence of this creature, has left his mind clouded. As your beta, it is my duty to ensure the stability of the Stonecrest Dominion on this sacred night. A murmur of unease rippled through the hall. "She is a defect," Gwenna cried out from the side, her voice high and clear. "She brings the sickness of the wild into our homes. Look at her. She cannot even speak our laws, yet she expects to sit on a throne." Rowan walked into the center of the hall, the crimson silk of her dress trailing behind her like a wound. She felt the heat of the moon, a static electric hum under her skin that made her senses 10 times sharper. "I'm not sick," Rowan said. Her voice was quiet, but in the sudden hush of the hall, it carried like a whistle in the woods. Corbin laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "It speaks, and it dares to challenge its betters. Feral, you have no rights here. By the law of the unmated, since your protector is unfit, I, Beta Corbin, challenge for the right to claim you, to tame you for the good of the pack." He stepped down from the dais, his eyes turning a predatory yellow. He reached for Rowan's arm, his fingers like steel traps. "And who is here to stop me?" "I am." The voice didn't come from the door. It came from the shadows behind the throne. Rhett stepped into the light. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was dressed in simple black, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal the scars on his forearms, scars from 10 years of survival. He wasn't the polished king they expected. He looked like the forest had finally come to claim its own. And behind him, walking with a slow, limping dignity, was a giant black wolf. The hall erupted in a collective gasp. Guards reached for their weapons, but Rhett raised a hand, and a wave of alpha power rolled off him so thick it physically pushed people back into their seats. "The wolf is not a rogue," Rhett said, his voice a low, lethal purr. "He is my brother in spirit. He is the guardian who kept your king alive when you had all given me up for dead." Corbin flinched, his grip on Rowan's arm loosening. "Alpha, we didn't know. The healers said—" "The healers lied," Rhett interrupted. He walked straight to Rowan, ignoring Corbin as if he were a flea. He took her hand, his touch warm and solid. "And you, Corbin, are sitting in my chair." The tension in the room was a physical weight. Corbin, backed into a corner by his own greed, did the only thing a coward can do. He doubled down. "You are compromised, Rhett," Corbin roared, his face flushing purple. "You've been poisoned by the wild. This girl, she's an animal. She's used some feral magic to bewitch you." "I have not been poisoned by the wild," Rhett said, turning to face the elders. "I was poisoned by this room, 10 years ago, and every day since I returned." He looked at Gwenna. The healer was pale, her hand darting toward the pocket of her white coat. Rowan's nose flared. The static of the moon was screaming at her. Beneath the scent of the feast, beneath the lavender and the wine, there it was. That bitter, metallic tang. It was stronger now. Fresh. "The darts," Rowan whispered. Gwenna froze. "The smell," Rowan said, her voice growing stronger as she pointed a finger at the healer. "You smell like the metal that made him sick. You smell like the sleep needles." The elders looked at Gwenna. The iron-haired matron page stood up, her eyes narrowing. "Gwenna, show us your hands." "This is madness," Gwenna shrieked, backing away. "She's a feral. You're listening to a girl who eats raw meat." But Rowan didn't need words. She moved. She didn't move like a girl in a dress. She moved like the weasel, all speed and instinct. She crossed the distance before Gwenna could react, catching the woman's wrist and twisting it. A small, gleaming silver syringe tumbled from Gwenna's pocket, skittering across the marble floor to land at the feet of the scarred elder. The silence that followed was more deafening than any howl. The elder picked up the syringe, sniffing the needle. His face went white. Silver nitrate and wolfsbane. The king's medicine. Rhett didn't roar. He didn't shift. He simply looked at Gwenna with a coldness that was more terrifying than any bared fangs. "You told my mate I was dead to break her. You tried to poison me again to keep your power. You are not a healer. You are a parasite." "Seize them," Matron Page commanded. The royal guards, finally released from Corbin's lies, swarmed the dais. Corbin fought, a desperate, ugly struggle, but Rhett's black wolf, the one Rowan called Basalt, stepped forward with a low, bone-vibrating growl. Corbin collapsed, his spirit breaking under the gaze of a true predator. As they dragged the traitors out, Gwenna's screams echoing in the rafters, Rhett turned back to Rowan. He didn't look at the hall. He didn't look at the throne. He fell to one knee in front of her. "For 10 years, you were my guide," he said, his voice carrying to the furthest corners of the room. "You saved the man, and you loved the beast. They call you feral, but you are the only one in this mountain who knows what it means to be pack." He reached out, his hand open. "Rowan of the Greenwood, will you be my queen?" Rowan looked at the hundreds of bowing heads. She looked at the giant black wolf, who was now nudging her hand with his nose, and she looked at Rhett. She took the charred wooden pendant from her palm and placed it in his hand. "We are pack," she said. The hall erupted, not in screams of fear, but in a roar of fealty that shook the very foundations of the mountain. But amidst the noise, Rowan felt the first drop of a cool, healing rain beginning to fall outside. The transition from a cage to a throne did not happen with the flourish of a cape, but with the quiet breaking of stone. In the weeks following the full moon feast, the Stonecrest Dominion underwent a transformation that the elders would speak of for generations. It began in the basement, under Rowan's direction and with Rhett's silent, unwavering support. The containment wing, the place of bleach and silver chains, was dismantled. The concrete was shattered, and the high, narrow windows were knocked wide to let in the mountain air. It was no longer a prison. It became a sanctuary, a place of soft moss and open water, where shifters who had lost their way, or those whose wolves had grown too wild for the city, could come to find their center. Rowan did not become civilized in the way Beta Corbin had intended. She still walked the corridors of the citadel with bare feet, her steps silent on the marble. She still preferred her meat rare and her rooms open to the night wind. But she had learned a new language, not just of words, but of the complex, unspoken bonds of a people who had forgotten how to be a pack. She taught the guards how to listen to the silence between heartbeats. She taught the healers that medicine was not just chemicals, but the intent behind the hand that held the vial. And most importantly, she taught the pack that an omega was not a defect to be managed, but the heart that kept the alpha's strength from turning into tyranny. One evening, as the first frost of autumn began to silver the needles of the greenwood expanse, Rowan stood on the high balcony of the royal suite. She wore a simple dress of soft wool, the charred wooden pendant hanging from a silver chain around her neck, a bridge between her two lives. Rhett stepped out from the shadows, his presence a warm, familiar weight at her back. He wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. He smelled of rain-washed pine and the steady, calm strength of a man who was no longer haunted. "The elders signed the new border treaty today," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. "The Greenwood is officially a protected sanctuary. No more patrols. No more traps." Rowan leaned back into him, closing her eyes. "And the Black Wolf?" "He returned to the high ridge this morning," Rhett said softly. "He's found a new pack, a group of rogues who needed a leader. He's free, Rowan. Just as I am." The silence between them was not the dead silence of the cage, but the living, breathing stillness of the woods. For 10 years, they had both been trapped, one in a body of a beast, the other in a world of survival. They had found each other in the dark, and in doing so, they had found the way back to themselves. "Do you ever miss it?" Rhett asked, his voice a low vibration. "The wild?" Rowan turned in his arms, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. She looked out at the vast, dark sea of trees stretching toward the horizon, then back into his gray, golden-flecked eyes. "The wild is not a place, Rhett," she whispered. "It is the truth we carry in our blood. I am still the girl who slept in the hollow of a spruce, and you are still the wolf who guarded my door." She reached up, pressing her palm flat against his chest, right over his heart. Thump. Thump. The rhythm was steady. The debt was paid. "We are home," she said. Rhett smiled, a true, unrestrained smile that reached his eyes. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers, in a gesture of absolute reconciliation. Outside, a lone wolf howled from the distant ridge, a long, silver thread of sound that spoke of peace. Rowan didn't need to howl back. She simply breathed in the scent of her mate and the cooling earth, a quiet, hopeful light rising in the east to greet a new day. The first winter of the new era did not come with a bite, but with a hush. In years past, winter at the Citadel had been a time of heavy iron gates and flickering hearths, a season where the pack huddled in fear of the rogues and the darkness beyond the walls. But under the reign of the Wolf Queen, the mountain breathed. The heavy steel doors that once led to the containment wing had been melted down and reforged into a grand, open-air pavilion known as the Sanctuary. Rowan spent most of her mornings there. The floor was no longer cold concrete. It had been layered with earth, soft moss, and cedar chips. High above, the roof had been partially removed, replaced by reinforced glass that allowed the pale winter sun to bathe the space in gold. One afternoon, a young shifter boy named Elias was brought to her. He was barely 7, his eyes wide with a terror Rowan knew all too well. His wolf had begun to surface early, triggered by the stress of his parents' illness. In the Old Dominion, he would have been labeled a defect and sedated. Rowan sat on the ground, her crimson silk dress pooled around her like a flower petal. She didn't reach for him with human hands. Instead, she sat in perfect stillness, her scent, pine, earth, and ancient calm filling the space. "The wolf inside is not a monster, Elias," she said, her voice a soft hum. "He is just the part of you that knows how to survive the storm. Don't push him into the dark. If you cage him, he will only grow teeth." She reached into a small velvet pouch at her waist and pulled out a small wooden carving. It wasn't the charred wolf she wore around her neck. It was a new piece, carved by Rhett's own hands, shaped like a soaring hawk. "This is a promise," she whispered, pressing the wood into the boy's small, trembling palm. "That in this pack, we do not fear the wild, we listen to it." Elias looked at the carving, then at Rowan. For the first time, the frantic, jagged scent of his fear began to smooth into a steady, rhythmic pulse of trust. Rowan felt a swell of quiet pride. She wasn't just a queen of laws, she was a bridge for the lost. That evening, Rhett found her on the high battlements, watching the first snowflakes drift toward the greenwood. He draped a heavy fur cloak over her shoulders, his arms lingering as he pulled her back against his chest. "Matron Page says the people are calling you the healer of the soul," Rhett murmured into her hair. Rowan leaned her head back, looking up at the stars that were beginning to pierce the twilight. "I am just reminding them of what they already knew. We are not made of stone and silk, Rhett. We are made of blood and moonlight." "And what about you?" he asked, his voice low and tender. "Is the girl of the greenwood happy in her palace?" Rowan turned in his arms, her fingers tracing the charred wooden wolf at her throat. "I am not in a palace, Rhett. I am with my pack. Wherever you are, that is the deep woods for me." Rhett leaned down, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that tasted of winter air and a decade of waiting. It was a kiss of reconciliation, not just between a man and a woman, but between the wild and the civilized, the past and the future. As the snow began to blanket the world in a pristine, silent white, the Alpha King and his Wolf Queen stood together on the edge of their world. There were no more chains, no more lies, and no more cages. There was only the steady, powerful heartbeat of a pack that had finally learned that to truly live, one must never forget how to be wild. The forest had taught her to survive, but her king had taught her how to belong. And together, they would ensure that no soul in the Stonecrest Dominion would ever have to howl in the dark alone again. Thank you for joining me for the story of Rowan and the Alpha King. This journey from the depths of the Greenwood to the heights of the Citadel reminds us that our true strength lies in our instincts and the courage to remain authentic, even when the world tries to cage us. If you felt the call of the wild in this story, please show your support by liking this video and sharing it with your fellow pack members. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new cinematic tale of romance and destiny. What should our next adventure be? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, stay wild.